Welcome to Make It, Share It, the podcast where we explore the simple but profound process to overcome fear, doubt, perfectionism, and more enemies of creativity. Make it and share it.
We'll talk to creators of all kinds, from artists and writers to entrepreneurs and inventors, to learn about their creative process, the challenges they faced, and how they overcame them by making and sharing.
Whether you're an artist, entrepreneur, or someone who wants to create but feels stuck, this podcast is for you. Creativity, meet courage. Welcome back to Make It, Share It, where creativity meets courage. Joined by Stephen Cooper and Lauren Chandler as always.
Hey.
What's up, guys? And then we're so excited to have Christie Purifoy join us on today's show. Christie is a gardener, she's a writer, she's a photographer, she's a placemaker. So we're super excited to have you, Christie. I did want to read a little bit. I won't do a long one, but just people that don't know you. So you've authored 2 memoirs, so Roots and Sky, A Journey Home in 4 Seasons, which was out in 2016, and then Placemaker, Cultivating Places of Comfort, Beauty and Peace, 2019. And then Christie's latest book just came out in March is Harvest, How Gardens Grow Roots, Connection, Wholeness, and Hope. And so it's a series, or it's a book of essays and photographs celebrating the garden. And that completed our trilogy on gardening gift books that began with Garden Maker and A Home in Bloom. And on the writing side, of course, that's all writing, but then your prep was doing your PhD in English literature from the University of Chicago.
That's right.
A Texas A&M grad before that, and then traded the classroom for an old Pennsylvania farmhouse called Maplehurst. And so today you're still teaching. I'd love to hear some about that and where you've gone there. So you also have a podcast that you do. There's a lot that you've been up to. So thanks for taking time in the midst of all that to join us.
Absolutely. It's so good to be here. There is a lot of creative work. And what's wild about it too, even up until I'd say age 25, even my late 20s, almost 30, if you had told me any of the things that I'm doing now that I would be doing them, I don't think I would have believed you, because none of those things were really in my life. So it's kind of wild, the shifts our lives can take.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful for the creative work I get to do, but it hasn't always been easy. And I love the concept of this podcast because it has often been scary as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we were talking a little bit in the pre-roll about our shared friend, Zach Simmons, who's a creative as well, and did a video for your recent book. I think it was for the recent book that you did a video.
Yes.
Yeah. So Zach and I were having lunch and talking about the podcast. And we had said from the beginning, whether you're an artist or writer, or entrepreneur or gardener, we're all about making and sharing. And so he said, I actually know a gardener. And I was like, that's amazing. We have to have her on the show. And so you've been gracious enough to respond to my email and come on and talk about the journey. So, and you've mixed all those together, which is super cool. So I want to start we always like to do just kind of a fun question, get to know you type question. So you're, been in and around literature for a long time. I'd love to know, is there a character in a book for you that is someone that you're like, man, if I could experience that life, that character's journey, is there a character, a story that jumps out to you?
Yeah, as soon as you said that, I knew. It's Mary Lennox in The Secret Garden. That was my favorite book as a child.
Yeah.
There are parts of her story. She lost her parents. It's got some of that like Victorian melodrama there. I wouldn't relish every part of her story. But if you haven't read The Secret Garden, or you haven't read it to your kids, gosh, it's gorgeous. And what Mary gets to witness is she knows nothing about seasonal climates. She's grown up in India. She comes to England. She knows nothing about nature, the outdoor world, gardening, and she gets to witness the awakening of an old English garden, and everything is new to her, from the daffodils, like all of it is new to her. And reading that, I identified with her as a kid because I too was growing up in Texas. My father was a gardener, but the climate was a little harsh, so I was an indoor kid. I just stayed inside with my books. But reading about what Mary experienced absolutely awakened something in me. And it took years, I think, before that seed that had been planted, really took root and grew. But I feel like she and her garden and that book have kind of been with me all along. So yeah, love
Mhm.
that question.
Very cool. Then what really kind of hit one there. So if you want to use that one, that's fine. But we like to just do a turning point, something that happened early in life that really changed the way that you think and live and relate in the world.
Mhm.
Um, so that, that was clearly influential for you. But is there any other turning points, or another turning point for you that you look back
Yeah.
on now?
Yeah, actually, a really key one came. It's in my early 20s. I was living in the city of Chicago. I was in graduate school, and a friend, a fellow graduate school student, just came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to share a plot in a community garden with me?" There was this vacant lot on the edge of our neighborhood, and you could like sign up to garden a little bit of it. And when she asked me, I thought, "What?" I mean, I was baffled. I almost didn't even understand what she was saying. Like, why? Why would I do that? Why are you doing that? But somehow in being asked, it did kind of awaken some childhood memories. My father had been a gardener. And so I was skeptical and thought, I don't even know if I like the things. Like, what would I grow? Tomatoes, peppers? I don't even eat those things. I don't know why I said yes. But I said yes. She was a friend. I thought this might be fun. And that was the beginning. Like, it all goes back to that and that community garden that we ended up gardening there at least 6 years there in Chicago. And I started growing flowers on my balcony. We didn't even have a backyard. We had a little patio balcony. But I sometimes think, like, what if she'd never asked me? What if she'd never invited me? I mean, it comes down to that crucial. I like to think maybe I would have still found my way to it. It was clearly in me and it was in my background, but that is the moment. And what if I hadn't said yes? What if she hadn't asked? And what if I hadn't said yes? But fortunately, she asked, and for whatever reason, I said yes, and that's really where it started.
I love
Sounds
those
like
kind of yeses
collaboration to me.
where you're like,
Yes.
yeah.
So key. If I had had total ownership of that plot, if I had walked by the garden and thought, oh, maybe I should do that, never in a million years. It was because I would do it with her. She also had a boyfriend who was kind of into gardening, and she told me, oh, he'll tell us what to do. And so it just seemed easy, and it seemed like something to do with others, something where I wouldn't be fully responsible, but I could kind of tiptoe in. And I think that was key as well. Yeah, collaboration can be, and friendship and relational creating can be kind of an open door for those of us who maybe aren't so sure or are a little scared or doubting. So yeah, that was a really important part of it.
What were you going to say about yeses, Lauren? I just want to make sure. I thought,
Oh, yeah.
like the kind of yes.
Yeah. I mean, I love these yeses that might not always make sense, but you have no idea where they might go. I mean, there's, like you said, there's no way if we had asked you then, that's like if we said, hey, saying yes is the first step to get you to this end. That you said it yourself that there's no way you would have believed that at that time, but you just said one simple yes that probably led to the next thing. Because I think in our creative journeys, sometimes we think the first step is this huge, massive, big sign. This is the way to go. When maybe it's just like a small yes because you have a relationship or a friendship. You're like, I want to spend time with them. I'm a little curious. So I love that about your story.
Small yeses. That's good.
Yeah, I just happened to read this morning. I'm just like a startup, for business email, and the quote today is from Paul Graham, who's part of something called Y Combinator in Silicon Valley that just helps startups get going. But he said, you want to start small, even if you have a big vision, because most things aren't like a big vision that are reverse engineered. They're a small start. So he was talking about, like with Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg did not think of Meta. He wasn't sitting in his Harvard room going, all right, here's Meta, here's where we're going to go. It was connecting students at Harvard online and really trying to research girls is what he was doing. Let's just be honest. And
Yeah.
so that's how small it started. And then, it blew up from there. And so it's just this, I love that kind of symmetry this morning for my own reading and research of how important it is just to say yes and just to try things in smaller, like a community garden, right? It's not just you. You're doing it with a few other helping hands. And so I love that picture. And man, yeah, that's in the making side of things. What a great way to think about making.
Yeah, a community garden in particular is a great image for this because not only was I gardening, I was sharing the plot itself, but we are gardening in a community. So there are all these other plots. And I still remember the older man who had a plot next to ours, and he had clearly been doing it for ages and had these incredible tomatoes growing. And I was too shy to really talk to him and ask him, and I was embarrassed about the state of my own plot. But I would look and I would watch him and I would see what he was doing and I would see when he was planting. And so it was like a community within a community, and you're surrounded by people with various levels of knowledge and experience, and how helpful that can be to be kind of rooted in a place where you're surrounded by teachers, mentors, examples. So I don't know, I kind of going to hold on to that image of a community garden as well, to think like, where else in the world, where else in life are there things like a community garden that function in that way? And how helpful that can be for trying new things.
Yeah. This is like skipping ahead, but I'm just going to do it because I have the mic and I'm the host. I saw that you mentioned small groups at Maplehurst doing teaching. What is that like, or what has that been like? Are you teaching writing? Are you teaching gardening, photography, all of it?
Yeah, it has looked like a number of different things. And it started with a space that we built. So we had this old falling down barn, but we kind of rebuilt it into a functioning barn that's finished where people could gather inside. And I just thought, well, I want to have people over. And, so we started with some workshops. So sometimes it was writing workshops. Sometimes it was things to do with the garden. Sometimes I was teaching. Sometimes I would just invite like a friend who was good at something, and she would do those workshops. And then even before the pandemic, I was feeling like, how do I open the doors wider? And so that kind of led a small group of us to start what we called the Black Barn online. And we used the Mighty Networks platform. And so that allowed us then to sort of do the same thing and root it in a real place and real relationships, but offer workshops and discussion groups and different things online. Well, that was February 2020.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, wow, okay. And then obviously that's just what we did for the next couple of years. So,
oh man. Yeah.
So that's still happening, and it's, shifting, taking new forms, but I'm grateful to have this sort of real world, like in this on the soil place that is connected to a digital place. I somehow feel like that partnership of both is really fruitful. When I talk about the Black Barn, I'm talking about the actual Black Barn, and I'm talking about an online space for all kinds of conversations. So it's been fun that teaching has kind of come back into my life a little bit. And that's something else, creative work, it can cycle that way. We might let go of things for a season. We might let go of things for a long time. And I let go of that academic life I had been pursuing. I only taught in the classroom for a short while after I earned my PhD. And there was sadness in that and things I missed, even as I was able then to pursue other things. So to have things come back, to be able to teach like an online workshop on, how to read a poem or something, which I've done, like that's old me kind of coming back in some new form. And it's been really fun. So I guess, especially if you have lots of creative interests, we can't do everything all at once necessarily, but things come and go and ebb and flow. And I feel like I've been doing it long enough to see that happen. And it's really, it's just, I hope that gives people hope. These things are not lost even when we let them go.
Yeah.
So was your plan to teach? Was the hope and desire?
Always. I was going to be an English professor. I had no other plan. The gardening I was doing on the side in Chicago was just like summertime hobby.
Okay.
no more. I was always going to be an academic. A number of factors, like a complicated fact, coming together of many things, kind of sent me on a different path. It was I started looking for an academic job in 2008. Well, you may remember what happened in 2008. So I went from having like, oh, here's 40 jobs I can apply for, to like, here's 4, and they're not even great fits because all the universities stopped their job searches for a couple of years there. So it was the economy. It was my family, where I was with, I had young kids. It was a number of things. And also I think started listening to myself in ways that maybe I hadn't been listening to myself in graduate school, and started to really get honest with myself about what I actually enjoyed, where I actually wanted to spend my time. And I had just, the PhD was such a long path that I just kept going because I wanted it, but also because I'd already committed so much to it. So I stayed on that path. But once it was finished, it was like there was a new freedom to say, okay, well, no one is making me do this any longer. What do I actually want to do? And that's when I realized, I want to write, but I'm not sure I want to write this academic thing I've been trying to write for a while. I want to write something more creative and more personal. And so it was all these things kind of coming together that it was like, oh, I'm headed in a different direction. And then we found a new home. We found this Maplehurst, and I started gardening, and no looking back, really. So in some sense, there was some bridge burning. Once you step off an academic career path, you can't really step back on, at least not in the same way. So I had to kind of get serious about what I was choosing. And yet I don't think that, the years I spent studying, not wasted. Nothing is wasted. I mean, if you're feeding your mind, your soul, like you're learning, you're experiencing, you're growing, like that is just never going to be wasted. And so I feel very much that those were years well spent, even though they didn't take me where I thought I was going, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, let's start with making, kind of moving into
Yeah.
that. We've been hitting around it, but I'm curious, especially, that's a good segue into the first memoir in 2016. So Roots and Sky, Journey Home in 4 Seasons. So tell me about I get the move, that's and what you just described, some of the heart behind it, but maybe what some of the struggles were,
Mhm.
you know, like, whoa, I pivoted from
Mhm.
the academic world and try to writing a memoir,
Yeah.
and what it was like. Cause now that you've got some momentum going, you just released the 3rd book of a trilogy.
Mhm.
But I'm curious to go back in time to that space
Yeah.
where you're trying to write that first one. Like,
Yeah.
what was that like?
Yeah, it was scary, again, because I knew, part of what I wanted to write about, my Christian faith. I wanted to write about things that just were not going to get me hired by an English department. I assumed anywhere, at least not as a starting out, academic. So it was scary to know that even stepping in this direction, I was closing some doors pretty, clearly. Also, and then to not know if I could do it. I didn't know. I had never even taken a creative writing class. I had always just been a reader and taught, if I taught writing, it was academic writing. It was sort of argumentative writing. It was reading in the form of essays. It wasn't that same kind of creative writing. And so I felt ill-equipped. I felt scared. Like, what does this mean career-wise? Because this might not go anywhere. And yet I felt so excited at the same time. Like, could I do this? Like, could I, instead of being just the reader of the book, could I be the maker of the book? And I didn't know. And I had a lot of doubt in myself. And yet just that felt exciting enough that I just kind of tiptoed in and kept going. And as soon as I started writing, like, I had to be in the thing. Once I was in the thing, I realized, okay, I may not be good at this yet, but I can do this thing. I can do this. I just didn't know because I'd never tried. So I had to try in order to realize maybe I can do this. But I will say this, this new path, it wasn't just a smooth turn into writing that first book. It was a turn into writing a memoir that was never published, that won't ever be published. It was just a book I thought it could be. That's why I was writing it. But it ended up being the book I just needed to write in order to learn how to be a writer, in order to figure out who I was, what is my writing voice. So if you had told me then, oh, Christie, this thing you're working on, it will only ever be a file on your computer, I would have been crushed. I don't think I could have handled that. I think that could have just sent me right back to work that was familiar. But I didn't know. And so I kept going. And eventually then we moved and I kept writing, I kept blogging, that was the thing at the time. And eventually I got this idea for the Roots and Sky book. And at that point I was more prepared and I was able to do it thinking more about my reader and less about myself. I wasn't just asking, can I do this? Can I write? I was saying, is this a book others want? What will make it a book others need and will enjoy? And so I was more focused on those who would receive what I was making rather than just me. Oh, look at me, I'm making, look at me, I'm writing a book, And so it was that was a journey of a couple of years with some switchbacks and some detours itself. So the path is not straight.
Yeah, it's not straight.
No.
It sounds very much like there's a major producer in the music world named Steve Lillywhite, who did the early U2 stuff. He did Dave Matthews early stuff. He's done Guster. He's done a lot. He's one of the biggest producer guys on the planet. And he's big on, he thinks that, I love how he describes songwriting. So it's not, I'm trying to write 12 songs for my next album.
Okay.
It's no, just get that pressure off. He thinks it's easier to go, you have to write 100 songs, which some people would go, oh my gosh, there's no way I'd write 100 songs. No, just write 100 songs. 85 of them, no one will hear. They will be garbage. You'll hate them by the time you get to like song 70 and listen back to songs 1 through 10. You're like, oh, those are bad. It's okay. No one hears them. But that's how we will mine out of these 100, the 12 you get. If you're trying to go for 12 for 12, no one does that. And so I always had that in my mind. So I'm always trying to create. And then I just saw a Graham Norton show episode that had Dua Lipa and Justin Timberlake. So random, and two people that you wouldn't think big songwriters. Well, they started talking about, hey, we both have big albums coming out. Justin's just came out. Dua Lipa's got another one coming. And Dua Lipa's like, I wrote 97 songs for this thing.
Oh, wow.
And you saw Justin Timberlake's face be like, and Justin Timberlake's face was basically like, I did not do that. And she was like, but I had to because 50 of them were awful. And I was like, that's it. So sometimes it's like, just write, just make, just start, just do stuff. And it will turn into the thing you might share one day, but it doesn't mean it all has to be shared.
I could not agree more. That is absolutely it. If you're too focused on the finished product, this product I'm making, you're tamping down that kind of creative flow and exercise and discipline of it that will just help you improve in your skills. And so to know going into it, there's going to be so much that I create, so much that I make, and some of it will be things I share with others. Some of it will actually maybe be published or have a more public platform. But that's just going to be a bit of everything I create, and learning to, like, it could be like play, like to enjoy the play of it, the play of creating, and to be a little less attached to the results. Creativity it's not efficient at all. But then life is not efficient. The goodness of life is not efficient, but we can kind of apply that sort of utilitarian mindset that the world operates in to our creativity. And it is not that way at all. So I love that. Yeah. So I wrote a memoir in order to write a later memoir.
Well, it's the Rick Rubin, since it's been 28 minutes and I haven't mentioned Rick Rubin, I might as well go ahead
take
and
a drink.
Everyone take a drink of something. He says the audience, like your audience shouldn't come into consideration until it's finished. So it's like, hey, I made a song, and then there's a A&R rep or a label or an editor who can go, oh, and I now know how to market this and who might want to like it. But if you sit down to create and go, who's going to read it and what are they going to react to it?
Yeah.
I think you're toast.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when I said, like, as I moved into the memoir that was published, and I was thinking of it as a book and with readers, I was the reader I was thinking about. I was thinking, oh, I love book. I mean, I brought
Mm.
up The Secret Garden earlier. Oh, I love books about houses and gardens. Oh, I want to read the, okay. So if I write a book about my house and my kind of first year journey in this old house, what mood do I want it to have? What do I, so even then I was the reader. And then, yeah, much later I'm thinking about who else might pick
Who
it up
could
as
do
a
it?
book. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to know what you do. I mean, if I'm assuming you get stuck sometimes.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear what you do when you get stuck in that process.
I go for a walk.
Yeah.
I mean that for, I actually, when I think more about like getting stuck in the garden or getting stuck with
Yeah.
photography, but getting stuck with writing, I think because writing is so interior, so mental, that it is always physical movement that just frees you up enough for ideas to start flowing again. So I always go for a walk. And actually, this is where creative pursuits can be so good alongside one another. So I just feel really lucky that I write and I garden, because I sit here at my computer, my body's not moving, my brain is going. And then I step into the garden and the brain quiets and my body is going. And that combination is so good. So good. So I think it could look different, depending on what we're doing, but making sure that you're kind of working all those, or not even working, like just living out of all those parts of yourself, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and somehow they're all a part of your day, or your routine, around your creative practices. So yeah, it's funny how we're embodied, we're bodies as well as minds. And we got to kind of bring it all in. So, there's maybe another conversation about getting stuck in a bigger sense. And I think there, just going for a walk might not help, but just rest, like rhythms of rest, are absolutely critical. So if there's been a lot of output, whether in the garden, here's a confession. I hate gardening by the end of October. I hate my garden. I hate gardening. I think, why do I do this? Why do I take on so much? I'm terrible. I don't want to do this anymore. Every fall, into the fall, every fall, right on time. And then winter. And oh my gosh, by February, here I am like, okay, can't wait to get back out, because I just drive myself to that point where I'm done, I'm emptied. And then, the gift of winter. And so if it's not gardening, if it's writing or photography or something else, we have to figure, gardening gives me a winter. You have to figure out how to take that winter rest with other creative pursuits. It's absolutely necessary. You have to step away for a while. You have to have the discipline, the regular doing of it, and then the stepping away, in order to fill back up, I think. Yeah. So that's a good question.
That's so good.
I have found two new ones. So Kent and I have talked for the last 30 years that we've both enjoyed just getting in the car with nowhere to go and driving. So there's something about, it engages your brain enough that you can't just be in your head. You're listening to music and then like you go. And Ryan Tedder, another music producer, he says he gets stuck and he has to go for a run. And he's like, I've never made it to the end of my block. Like, I was like, I put on my shoes, I changed my clothes, I get out there. And he's like, I put on a different song, something way different than what we've been working on. And he was like, I make it a quarter of a mile. And I'm like, I don't know how to fix the song. And he has to turn around and run back. So my two new ones have been cooking. I've gotten into cooking, which everyone in my life laughs. I have the worst eating habits of anyone that I've ever met for the last 40 years. I shouldn't be alive. So the fact that I'm cooking food, people are like Hot Pockets? I'm like, no. Like I'm actually cooking. I'm making food. And then Legos. I have never been to Legos in my entire life. I've been building like mega 4,000 piece Legos. And so I just sit down. I try to do one bag. If you're a Lego person, you understand the bag. You get one bag a day on my dining room table. And I start making, right now I'm making the Batcave, a 4,000 piece Batman. And it's something about, again, it engages you. You have to read instructions and you're building. And then it's like a break. I feel refreshed after it, but then also I come up with great ideas doing those two things. So those are, and I'm 45 and these are my first times I've done Legos or been cooking. And I've like felt like a new like life force behind those two things
That
to
is
do
awesome.
other stuff.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
could totally see both of those being super effective and fun and
Yeah, it's
tasty.
awesome. Very good.
Love it. Were there any helpful guides or mentors for you in that early stages too? You know, we've talked
Mhm.
on the show about some personal guides we've had that we know, and then guides from afar.
Mhm.
You know, Coots mentioned Rick Rubin. You know, that's been one for him. For me, there's been guys like John Eldridge, and then there's been people like Stephen Pressfield. You know, from afar, Brenda Euland. There's just several. So for you, were there any that were either ones you knew or
Mhm.
books you read
Mhm.
that helped?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing I did when I was still, between Chicago and Pennsylvania, living in Florida, trying to figure out, can I write a creative book? The first thing I did was go to, just try to read everything I could, things I had been reading in grad school, but were the kind of thing I thought maybe I could do. So it started with finding those other voices and receiving them through their books. So these weren't people I knew. And then community immediately became a very important part. So someone had advised me, or maybe this advice was online, if you want to break into writing, you need to go to some conferences, you need to connect with other writers and with editors. So I signed up then it was the Festival of Faith and Writing, and found a few others. And so in the first few years, like, that was critical to meet others who were doing the same or similar work, connect with them, become friends with them, and then at some point it can turn into really supporting each other as you're releasing work. But in the beginning, just finding that community. The same has been true for gardening. And then the really scary thing for me that I picked up with this last sort of trilogy of garden gift books was photography. I still say I'm not a photographer. I could take some pictures of my garden with my iPhone, but I was not. I didn't know anything about real photography, is what I would say. And so I went on Skillshare. If anyone knows that that platform for learning new creative things. And I just studied all the Skillshare videos I could from people who, photographers who've taken the time to create these great videos about how to edit, how to use your digital camera. I couldn't have done it without that. And, so kind of finding out what's worked. Do you need to find somebody local? You need to find someone in person. I think for me, because I was so scared to take the photographs for these books. Having that kind of impersonal online tutoring, they don't know me, I don't know them, I'm just watching their videos. That I think allowed me to step into that. So yeah, I think teachers and mentors come in all forms, but communities is important, and then learning from the experts. I can't imagine feeling this way, but there might be some who are like, oh, I got this, I can do this. But just to that humility to say, no, there are people, there's always someone who's been doing this a lot longer than me. So where do I find them? What can I learn from them? And so, yeah, for photography, I found it on Skillshare.
So are you digital photography or film or both?
Yeah, just digital, not
Okay.
film. Yeah, just a pretty, I found a kind of like a fancy enough camera that it could help me take good pictures, but not so fancy that it would be hard for me to use. So like finding that, tools are important, and
Yeah.
and I'm not a tech person, so I had to do that research and ask around to say, what is a tool, not what is the best tool, because the best is for the best. The best is for that wedding photographer, that wildlife photographer, and I'm not that. So what is the tool that allows me to kind of maximize what I can do? Yeah. So middle camera.
Here's my thing though about tools that always used to drive me nuts was when I don't even want to bring in my film or background, Kent, it's embarrassing. But when I would film something or record something or take pictures from somebody, it always drove me nuts when they would go, oh, those pictures turned out amazing. What kind of camera do you have? And I was like, look, man, Babe Ruth didn't hit home runs because he had the best bat. He knew how to swing that thing. All right. Like I took good photos. The camera was irrelevant. So then because of who I am, it sent me on a course like, I'm going to take the best photos I can with a disposable camera.
Oh,
Just so these folks will be like, what's your camera? And be like, the Kodak thing I bought at CVS.
I love that.
How you like that?
You're pushing yourself and you're saying,
I
I'm
like
gonna,
it.
how much can I do with just this small thing I have? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And that means, like you don't have to run out and spend money. You don't have to go be a
That's the
consumer
key.
first before you can start creating. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good.
absolutely. Some of the biggest albums that are of all time are they're not good musicians and they didn't have good gear
Yeah.
and they're still getting played 40, 50 years
Yeah.
later. And so
Yeah.
I teach a little songwriting class and I'm always trying to encourage these kids because a lot of them have $50 Target guitars. And I'm like, well, it sounds bad, but make it your own and it'll be the new thing.
Mm,
So I was like, don't worry about that $50 guitar.
that is
Like
great.
again, no one wrote good songs because they have the $3,000 guitar.
Right?
You got to just learn and
Mhm.
play and write 100 and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Mhm. Yeah, I sometimes because I write for I'll share in places where there's a lot of like maybe faith communities or and so on, and so my kind of corollary to that in the gardening world is that I'll share some beauty from a garden I've made, and always there will be comments that say, "Oh, isn't God a great artist in the in creation in the natural world?" And I want to say, actually.
Mhm.
I mean, creation, nature had something to do with it. There's the raw material. But not only me as the garden maker, but the all those working in plant hybridization who have created trees and plants and beauty that did not exist before until they crossed this with that and this and that work is painstaking and happens over years. And anyway, so I always feel a little like humans had a lot to do it. Creative,
Yeah.
smart humans had a lot to do with what you're seeing right now in this
That's
photo.
interesting.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think about to that as Hitchcock would say, he saw the technology where it was going and was like, there's going to be a point in the future where everybody has what they need in their hand to make a film.
Yeah,
And he was right,
that's right.
Now, there's a counter when you get to film because it involves so many people that I'm like, true, but then you have to have the acting, like all the acting has to come together. And there's a lot that has to come together with film, but it reminds me of you just got again, it's kind of like when we started. You got to start small and don't let equipment or tools be a barrier.
Yeah.
Get what you can get, but then get to making. So I love that. And then moving to sharing, so we make sure to hit that. Chris and I were talking about it early before we started rolling that some people sharing is supernatural. It's a gift, honestly. I think they've been given, and it's a good thing, right? C.S. Lewis talks about how anything we experience that's beautiful, that's lovely, that has wonder in it, we share it. That we all do that. It doesn't matter who you are. You find something that you love and you share it. But when it's our own creation, there's something that blocks a lot of us. And so I'd love to hear, again, I think kind of going back to the first memoir, like sharing that the first time. What was that experience like for you as it's getting ready to go out into the world?
Yeah, it's a very vulnerable, scary time. And I have felt it with the books. And then I felt it even with the garden. There's been once or twice where people I think of as like they're professional gardeners or they're experts, and I've been amazed at just how much I have to grapple with shame. Like I'm just so sure that what I've done is inadequate and is shameful somehow, and it's a battle. I think with the writing, it is even maybe heightened for me because the material for my writing is my life, my observations. I'm a memoirist. I write. I'm not I'm not. The raw material isn't like stories I've created in my imagination. It is observation. I'm an observational writer, and so I'm observing my own life. And so what gets then shaped into the stories is the raw material is from my own experiences. And I'm writing in that first person, and it makes me feel so vulnerable. And I have had people ask, like, "Wow, how do how can you be so brave to share from your own life? Why do you want to do that?" And I always want to say, first of all, I don't want to do that. I actually don't. Nothing about that appeals to me. I don't have that natural. I'm a very introverted person. But a key switch for me early on was realizing that a big part of why I didn't want to share was pride. I didn't want to be vulnerable. I didn't want to show myself. I didn't want to reveal myself, because then I could be criticized. Then I could be taken down. And so it was weirdly, it was pride that was keeping me from being bold enough to and courageous enough to share. So once I realized that, like, okay, it's pride holding me back, and so it's humility to show up. And I believe in humility. So I know this is the right thing to do, but it will never feel easy. It will never feel comfortable to me. It gets easier. But it's always there. So realizing that switch. And then with the first book, I just feel like there was just a grace for that book release. It came in a weird form. That particular one, we had a really hard we had a death in our family right the month before my book came out. And it was public, and it was awful. And I couldn't focus on the book release, and everyone knew, like, she can't, in all these ways. I had to step away from that. And I often look back at that, and as much as there were awful things happening, there was kind of a gift in the fact that I had been forced to distance myself from that moment of release. And in a way, I think it's because I was so scared to do it. And so there was just a grace where I was given other things that were more important. It was more important that I be with my family. It was more important that, I'd be present with them, and it right-sized all my not expectations. It right-sized just how important everything was. The book mattered. It was very important, but now there were other things that were more important. And since that was my first experience, it's kind of carried through with all the subsequent book releases. There's still that vulnerability. There's still that fear, it's always for me a stressful time. And yet always there's this sense of, this is not the most important thing happening in the world. It's just something I get to offer. It's maybe not, it doesn't even have to be the most important thing happening in my life, but it's an important thing. But I try not to lose perspective, and I try not to take it into myself as like a reflection of myself, how this book is received or how well it does, but to let there be this distance. And it really, to me, feels like this metaphor is often used, kind of, you're like birthing a child or something, but there is something to it in the sense that during the creative process, the making process, it is all mine. And then there is this letting go. Now it lives its own life. It's people receive it or they don't, or they criticize it or they love it, but that is separate from me. And is not a reflection on me. I can learn some things, but it is out there. It is not in here any longer. And that feels like a necessary distance to make for creative people, artists to maintain. Not always easy, but for me at least necessary.
Yeah. It's good to know I'm not alone in that. Yeah, when just having to remind myself that, like you said, there are some things to learn. I want to grow as a creative, as an artist, but also to detach my identity from the thing I made, but to offer it and kind of let it go where it's going to go and land where it's going to land. And people are going to resonate with it, and some people aren't. But like I said, to not confuse what I made with who I am.
That was an exercise that a mentor guy told me once, when it was like, okay, so I go back to the Rick Rubin idea of like, hey, just make stuff. And when you make something that you enjoy, that means it's good. So if I'm writing songs and then one day I go, that one's awesome, I like this, then it's good. You wrote it, you made it, you like it, it's good. So the tastemakers or whoever says it's not good, that doesn't matter. Now go share it with a friend is always his next thing. So there's something about that that was like, hey, this is coming out, this is going out in the world, or this and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, how would you feel if you put it out there, but you didn't have your name on it? And that was the thing of like, take your name off of it and just release it as a band and put a new name on it. And then no one knows it's you. Does that change anything? And when it changed everything. It brings up your pride, that you want credit. So Tame Impala is my favorite. There's a band called Tame Impala. That is not a band. That is one person. So when he first started writing, he didn't want to be known. And he said, like, I think he's Australian or New Zealand. They were looking for bands to market. So he's like, I'll just call myself Tame Impala, and people will, and it's a band, it's a full band sound. And he was like, everyone will just assume we're 4 or 5 guys. And he goes, here's what's tricky. Then it came out and did really well, and it blew up, and he's multi-platinum. He's like, wait, it's me. My name is, I did it all. This is me. And he's like, now I want my name on everything. And I've always used that, like, sometimes if your name's not on it, it takes away the stress, or it also reveals what's going on in your heart and your head of like, oh yeah, this is a lot more about me and how people will react and think of me. So I just take my name off stuff.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it reminds me of The Prestige, which is one of Christopher Nolan's, like, I think underrated films, but
it's a good one.
Basically a story of magic and magicians and performers. But there's a scene where there's Hugh Jackman's role is like the creator of this performance, but it's Christian Bale getting the applause, and underneath the stage you see Hugh Jackman's character, like, basking in the sound of the applause, but it's not him because he's under the stage. And I just am like, man, that is such a powerful picture of creating sometimes. And but it really does trip us up. And that's where, you mentioned briefly, Christy, just a hint of like, sometimes you need more rest than just a walk. It's deeper. And I'm just convinced that there are times where it's like, we have to do some work internally. We have to go on a journey internally about what's driving us to make and to share, sometimes before we can actually break through to our authentic making and sharing. And if the journey is about that applause, getting to the heart of, okay, that will complete me. Man, it's not that you can't make some good stuff. You can. Yeah. It's just that what's really driving the creation. And so that's the picture, that Prestige picture is just what came up as you guys were talking about that. So
yeah. It reminds me, just, to bring it back to gardening, I find I really do garden for myself, the gardening, the activity of it. But even the beauty I create is, I don't have to have someone over when something's so beautiful. I mean, there is the urge to share, and I'll take pictures and share it, but I really do create for myself. But I remember when I started the first garden gift book, and so started taking pictures from my garden for that first in the series called Garden Maker. I started that in winter 2020. And so pretty quickly in that work, everything shut down, and I knew no one will, and so this was March, right? My garden was just not quite waking up. I knew no one will see my garden this year. No one. I mean, my immediate family, my kids don't care. Let's be honest. I think like me and my father's garden, it's doing its work, but they don't really care. They're not applauding me. Yes, Mom, great job on the flowers. And I knew, no one, I'm not going to host a garden party this year, no tea party in the roses. Like no one's going to see this. And so the book that I had been actually quite scared to say yes to, and I had been scared to say yes to taking the photos for the book. I realized, wow, no one is going to see this garden in person, but I'm going to share, I have the opportunity to share this 2020 garden is actually, because every year it's different. The 2020 garden will be in a book, kind of not forever. Even a book's not forever, but for an extended time, and just the surprising goodness of that. So even though I say, like, I garden for myself, it's okay if no one wanders through my garden, and also especially with the garden, people who don't have eyes kind of trained to see it, they often don't see it. So they'll come and they'll be in it, and they may never say a word about it. It can feel as if they take it for granted, or they just don't notice it. That is something that gardeners experience, and I'm really okay with that, because I do it for myself. I do it because I love beauty, and I want to be surrounded by it, and this is how I get to do it. And so, even if I hadn't had the book in that year, it would have been worth it to live in the midst of beauty, So whether we're cooking or gardening or whatever, like if you're your only audience always, it might still be absolutely worth it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. I think about the secret garden. So
Yeah.
I had two girls go through a classical Christian school
Mm.
and they had to read The Secret Garden, which I loved. And I don't know if I'm going to remember
Mhm.
this accurately. It's been a few years. I think sixth grade is when they read it. But when I think about you, Christy, I think about Mary and how, she discovered that key, right? Didn't
Mhm.
she find the key
She did.
first?
She did. Mhm.
Yeah, which was a small start.
Mhm.
And she could have just held onto the key,
Mhm.
but she tried a door and she opened it and she
Mhm.
walked into the secret garden. And then it started coming alive to her.
Yeah.
She started cultivating it and then she shared it. And I just think
She did.
about you and all the ways that you're like Mary,
Mhm.
where you found, had the curiosity to take that first
Mhm.
step to open the garden, and to do the small things to cultivate it.
Mhm.
And now for your own joy and your
Mhm.
own
Yeah.
enjoyment and all the things, photography, writing, literally physically gardening. And then you've started to invite people in
Mhm.
to your garden to experience it with you.
Mhm.
And you're right, like the people that will have the eyes to see it will enjoy it
Yeah.
and it will speak to them and it will be a blessing and
Mhm.
encouragement to
Mhm.
them, just like it was to Mary's
Mhm.
friends. Anyway, so
I
as
love that.
our whole conversation, I keep thinking, Christy is Mary.
I
She is
can.
so
Oh.
Mary in the secret garden. I see it all playing out. Anyway,
Ah.
I love what you're doing, and I love that you've invited us into
Mhm.
this beautiful world
Mhm.
that you've created.
Mhm. That makes me a little teary, actually. I have never, as much as I have always loved her, never
Mhm,
quite seen myself in a her story, and
mhm.
I will hold on to that because
Good.
that is beautiful. And you're right; she shared it. That was important to her, and she, invited these friends into it, and there was relational healing that happened
Yeah,
because she invited others into it. Others
right.
were awakened and healed by the beauty of that garden. So that's really great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
So you said you remind me a lot. My mom had her master's in English and taught English for 40 years and is maybe, I mean, I married a mega reader. My
Mm,
mom is a mega reader, constantly reading every day, multiple books, and then would be teaching a book and she'd read
mhm,
it again every year.
mhm,
She was reading whatever we were reading. It blows my mind.
mhm,
So, in the last year or two, has there been a book that you've read
Mm.
that you've really enjoyed?
mhm.
Because I imagine, are you still like a crazy reader?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, if you could see my bedside table, I mean it has like 30 books on it at any given
Yeah.
time because I love them so much, but I start lots of books and maybe I finish them, maybe I don't. Maybe I
Mm.
set them, they might sit on that table for 6 months and they get picked back up again.
Mhm.
Oh, this is such a question. How even to answer it? Is there a particular book? Um, a couple years, so I don't even know, was it this year? At some point, it was in a winter. So we've been talking a little bit about rest, seasons, gardening. This is appropriate. Um, so it hasn't been too long since I read a book called Wintering by Catherine May. Um, Wintering, I believe that's the title of it, and she really dives into that metaphor, not just as winter as a season we walk through, but almost as a practice, as a activity. If by activity we
Mm.
mean not doing so much,
Mhm.
and especially what that book gave me is kind of new eyes for my own seasons of like illness. I tend to get sick a lot, and I have terrible allergies, which is I'm allergic to everything out in my garden. It's an awful irony for a gardener. And so the very thing, and anytime a doctor says, well, stay inside on those days, I just know I'm not going to do that. The garden, I need it. It's keeping me alive. So it's just this hard thing, that the thing that's making me sick is the thing that is healing me as well. Anyway, that book, Wintering, as she talks about her own kind of illness and different things, helped me to realize, oh my goodness, even illness, like I knew winter could be a gift, but even illness or weakness or like the things that keep us from doing what we love can be times of respite. They can be their own grace, their own gift. And so, it's just helped me to embrace not only the season of winter as a rest, but even those times in a busy summer where all of a sudden I'm taken out by, my asthma flares or something, and I'm just taken out and I have to go to bed and stay there, for a couple of days. I've come to realize that actually as a sensitive, creative person, those times might even there may be a reason why I get sick a lot. It may be my body saying, okay, you've done enough. Let's go to bed for a while. Let's fill back up. And so it's just been a real shift that book gave me to realize it's not always fun, but it can be good. It can be helpful. And even just to embrace my own sensitivities, my own, what feels to me like weakness. I feel weaker often than other people. Like, who are these people? They just keep going through life, hustle. And I just get waylaid so easily by emotion or a virus or, whatever it is. But to see that as it's just part of it, and that is okay. It can be all good in a way. So she has another book called Enchantment, I think, that I liked as well. Not as much as the winter one, but both kind of just did what good books do, just help you step aside and see your own life. She's writing about her life. This is why I love memoir. She's writing about her life, and she helps me to see my life. That is just fantastic.
Love that. I will put as usual, all these links in the show notes. But if there's one place or couple, Christie, that would be good places for people to follow you, and obviously Seedtime and Harvest just came out, to go get that book, where would that be?
Yeah. I mean, you can find them anywhere books are sold. So especially all the online places, but you can ask for it if you've got an independent bookstore that you love. So Seedtime and Harvest is the name of the latest one. And then definitely if they want to check out my website, sign up for my newsletter, or find me on Instagram. I do love to share. I think of Instagram, I love hospitality. So Instagram is one more place where I can sort of welcome people to Maplehurst and share the changing seasons. So those are places where they can find me.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I'll add those links so it's easy to get to them. And thanks for taking time to join us. This has been so fun.
It really has. I could kind of keep going, second hour of the show. I feel like
second part too.
Yeah, this is just rich conversation. So great topic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it is funny. I'm listening to a podcast and they have 2-hour shows, even 3-hour shows. I've never encountered that before.
Wow.
And my wife's been making fun of me because she was like, have you not extinguished all their episodes? I'm like, I don't think I've listened to a third of them. Some of them are 3 hours long. And so anyway, yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. So anyway, but the calendar is you made other things.
Yes. Yeah. And my garden is calling. So
and your garden is calling.
Yeah.
So well,
but thank
great.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, thanks everybody for joining us again. You can rate and review on Apple in particular for whatever reason. Algorithms like when you review there if you're enjoying the show. And we'll see you next time on Make It Share It.
You see here, kid? You gotta just go for it. Don't think about what comes after or what came before. You just gotta bend your knees, take a deep breath, and jump. And you might think, what if I fall? Well, what if you don't?